Last month I looked over Spielberg's classic film Jaws, considered by many to be the best film he ever made. If you watched that, then you saw the lamentation of the young Spielberg when his film was snubbed in so many areas, as well as for himself. This would continue a trend. His timeless hits that followed, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Raiders of the Lost Ark, E.T., were huge hits, and likewise failed to garner Spielberg recognition. What's notable is that neither Close Encounters nor E.T. were intended to be huge pictures. Spielberg felt that they were personal films, but they were treated as huge pictures because they were huge successes. It would be simplistic to suggest that moving over to the period pieces that followed, like The Color Purple and Empire of the Sun, were an attempt to distance himself and attain recognition for the artist that he was, because Spielberg was happy to continue seeing those kinds of popular films being made, like Poltergeist, Goonies, Back to the Future, and Gremlins. It was just that, aside of the further Indiana Jones pictures that he'd promised to make, Spielberg seemed to prefer directing other kinds of films at this time. Jurassic Park, however, seemed like a situation created to bring Spielberg back to his roots. Like Jaws, an adaptation of a book about primal monsters, of confrontation with nature that did not recognize man as the dominant species. Spielberg is reported to have breezed through the incomplete novel in a single evening before agreeing to attach his name to the project, and the result would again shake cinema. Before we get down to the classic film, Jurassic Park, a note that this is the culmination of a week-long series. You can find links below the video to the examination of the novel, the real-world search for dinosaur DNA that inspired this film, and chaos theory and its relation to the novel. I'll gloss over those aspects here rather than rehash the points. Before the film even starts, we're getting a taste for one of its themes. The sound of the jungle plays over the Universal logo and into the titles, complemented by John Williams' music that has a subtle jungle sound to it as well. The subconscious message is clear. You have entered the world of nature, so tread lightly. After faking out the audience with the idea that the gathered group of workers are here to face a dinosaur and instead see a cage being delivered with a clearly terrifying creature within. When things go wrong and a worker is in peril, we see that the assembled might on display is not enough to save him. The parallel to the shark attack at the start of Jaws is obvious, but nevertheless Spielberg uses this to help sell us on the threat of the velociraptor. Watch as we go along the way the film builds up to their actual appearance, which is 15 minutes before the end credits roll. That's right. Does that figure sound wrong to you? Well, that's how well their menace is established throughout the film. They cast a shadow over it, but mostly it is the threat, the promise of coming monsters. The significance of the opening scene is also to foretell of the fall. While humans have a few biological advantages like versatility, we're not the best at any physical task, but we are respectable at almost all of them. Our main strengths are the ability to plan, the ability to coordinate, and the ability to use tools. All three are on display here, and all three prove wanting. It's a matter of interpretation whether or not the response to Muldoon's order to shoot are lethal gunshots or not. That may seem a ridiculous thing to say, since that is either a semi-automatic or fully automatic rifle. However, Muldoon and his men are on the opposite side of the cage from that rifle, which is why I mention it. It might be that they are using non-lethal rounds, is my point. But either way, whether they are trying to kill the creature or merely incapacitate it, this is still an indication of failure, beyond the fact that the worker died. The goal is not the raptor's death, but its subservience, to go into the pen where they feel it belongs. This naturally ties into the single largest theme of the film: you can't presume to control nature. Recall in Jaws the way Spielberg introduced the major characters to the audience. Brody is shown as a working-class stiff in contrast to the local elite. Quint as the only one who grasps the enormity of their threat and is the one who might be able to match it. Hooper as a man comfortable with the water, but capable of being a smartass with the rubes. and even Mayor Vaughn as the symbol of obstinance by appearing first to thwart the efforts of Brody to save people. We get an immediate sense of their character, which can then be molded later on, but in keeping with the introduction we had for them. Likewise, Jurassic Park uses the same shorthand to get the audience up to speed on the characters quickly, and how they should be perceived. They start with Donald Gennaro, the lawyer, because note how we meet him. Not in an urban setting where he fits in, not in some high rise with an assistant to get his coffee at the snap of a finger, but wearing his fancy suit in a place where it is clearly wholly impractical, immediately making clear for the audience that this is not a man who will thrive far from civilization. Hence why out here his only concern is insurance and investors, setting up the financial threat that John Hammond and his park faces, and why we're going to have experts sign off on the park's safety, which necessitates an inspection. The scene also shows these men in the mines are working to acquire amber, and are extremely excited about a piece that has a mosquito inside of it, teasing of its significance. We next meet the name-dropped Alan Grant along with his girlfriend, a fellow scientist, Ellie Sadler, digging up a velociraptor fossil, although pausing to allow the computer team to examine the find before the dig is even complete. After Kid throws some shade on the animal, Grant then menaces him a little, describing the awful way the raptor will kill him, continuing to build that suspense for when our monster is later revealed. This is also when Alan explains to a crowd that probably should already know this, that birds were likely the descendants of dinosaurs. In fact, as I mentioned on Monday, our views have come so far that it's now considered more correct to refer to the creatures in this film as non-avian dinosaurs or non-bird dinosaurs. Though I will again just use the term dinosaur, since you can likely presume when I'm referring to a brontosaurus and not a chicken. But again, the introduction quickly establishes Grant as a man who knows his dinosaurs and is happy getting his hands dirty, and Ellie is likewise shown to be an expert in her quick examination of the skeleton. The work is interrupted by the arrival of John Hammond, who pops open the champagne without permission, but then offers further research financing to convince them to come endorse his park. Hammond is likewise established as a cheerful man who is a bit presumptuous and assumes that any problem can be solved by throwing enough money at it. One place where it certainly does is with Dennis Nedry, who is soon seen taking payment to perform some industrial espionage, stealing embryos from John Hammond. His aside explains his motivation, that despite sparing no expense, as Hammond is often saying, he's cheap when it comes to Nedry. This miserliness was a trait of Hammond in the book, cutting corners everywhere, including with effectively blackmailing Nedry into providing personal on-site tech support to eliminate all of the bugs in the software. But that seems different than the Hammond that we get in the film. There's financial tension motivating them, but we don't know if Nedry is justified in his feelings or if Nedry is just feeling greedy. In either case, Nedry is the film's villain. Every death that takes place for the rest of the film is undeniably his fault. Our next introduction is in the helicopter to Ian Malcolm, whom we quickly see as a man quite certain of himself and bemused by the folly of this enterprise. Ian name-checks phase space and strange attractors, important concepts in chaos theory, but doesn't elaborate on them, nor do we need to. They're not necessary to understand in order to grasp the point that Ian is involved in some kind of cutting-edge field, and combined with his sense of dress, suggests that he's some kind of a maverick. As a result, we know that Ian is the one most likely to question preconceived notions. After he's finished hitting on Ellie, we can finally head in for the landing and the Jeep trip to fully reveal to the audience the amazing sight of dinosaurs. While there are many things we can learn from Jaws to apply to the making of Jurassic Park, in one sense, it is nevertheless the anti-Jaws. While Jaws drove some people to despise sharks even more, Jurassic Park led to a whole new interest in dinosaurs. There was a lot more support for dinosaur research, and a whole generation inspired to grow up and study them, which, as I mentioned earlier this week, is called the Jurassic Park effect. As a result, we have learned a great deal more about dinosaurs thanks to more research, more funding, and more experts, to the point that we know that the dinosaurs of Jurassic Park bear only a passing similarity to the real thing. That's the amazing paradox. We might not have known how wrong Jurassic Park is if it wasn't for the scientific advances Jurassic Park helped to encourage. Because so much we used to know has been discovered to be wrong. I'll bet there are already comments written chastising me for mentioning the Brontosaurus. But we have learned enough to know that they are separate from Apatosaurus. Think that mammals at the time were just tiny rats? We found mammals, actual mammals, not reptiles, that are large enough to eat small dinosaurs. We even found a fossilized mammal with a dinosaur in its belly. Isn't that great? Even I wasn't aware until this week that techniques had so advanced that we can now get pigment out of the rock to better determine how dinosaurs look. Hence the controversy of Jurassic World not having the dinosaurs updated with new science. So much has been learned in the interim that portraying dinosaurs consistently across the franchise requires you to ignore the new discoveries. After the astonishing revelation, it's off to the resort for the tour to explain how all this happens. Thanks to cloning and a dinosaur DNA recovered from mosquitoes preserved in amber, thus explaining to the audience the significance of the mine from the beginning, we can understand how this could all be done. This, incidentally, was what really sold Spielberg on making the film, saying he had wanted to do something with dinosaurs, but it was Crichton cracking how it could be plausibly done that convinced him to actually do it. As discussed earlier this week in the Dino DNA video, Crichton was utilizing the work being done by real-world scientists, but obviously his book's acknowledgement has made clear that he wasn't trying to claim the credit. The STEM people quickly jumped the tour to get a first-hand look at this, leading to the hatching of a dinosaur right before their eyes, along with the revelation that by design, the dinosaurs are all female, so the only ones that exist hatched right here in this lab. Ian lays out his problem with this, that Hammond is attempting a degree of control that is impossible, and his famous statement, "Life finds a way." Delivering the second of this 1-2 punch is Alan's sudden concern about this dinosaur that he's holding, and having it confirmed this is a velociraptor. This again continues to build the suspense for the monster in waiting. Alan and Ellie's reaction to the news of a T-Rex was not horror, it was being overwhelmed by how unbelievably fantastic that news was. But the idea of this dinosaur, one they would just been studying, does not elicit the same reaction, but rather horror. The man who best knows this creature is horrified to discover it again walks the earth. The point is reinforced when the pack of raptors is fed a live cow, continuing the suspense by refusing to show them to us, drawing it out and backing it up with the return of Muldoon, who says that not only are these things faster than Alan thought, but also smarter. So smart, they systematically checked the fence for weaknesses. This, we're being told, is the real worry. It's not the creature with a head full of teeth that's the size of a school bus you need to worry about. It's these.
I made a fool of myself. I fell all over myself to make this movie in front of Michael. Doing everything but getting down on my knees and begging him, because I loved the idea of, DNA and dinosaurs in many combinations.
It may be hard to believe, but Jurassic Park was not the surefire bet of the summer. That was Last Action Hero. No, seriously. Arnold Schwarzenegger was just coming off of the incredible success of Terminator 2. It was assumed that this would be just as successful. And meanwhile, Spielberg's last two pictures, Hook and Always, had not impressed people at all. Spielberg doing dinosaurs sounded like another personal folly to many industry experts. Obviously, history has made the winner abundantly clear. Lunch has three notable aspects to it here. First is Hammond further demonstrating the divide between himself and his novel counterpart. That Hammond was a dinosaur nut, sure, but still ultimately wanted to make money hand over fist. The Hammond that Spielberg gives us instead, well, let's say perhaps it could be titled Portrait of the Artist as an Old Man. Spielberg could certainly choose to rest on his laurels if he wanted to, but he keeps putting out films either as director or producer. When the fact that his total film grosses were about to top $10 billion, he said the money didn't interest him. He did it because he wanted to give something to audiences. Their approval, their enjoyment, and remembering them is what Spielberg really wants, he said. And that attitude seems to apply to Hammond, that this is a man in the autumn of his years who wants to give the world something wonderful before he departs it. And he thinks this park is it. Money only matters to keep his investors happy. The second of note is Ian's criticism of the hubris of this entire enterprise, many of his arguments being drawn from things that his novel counterpart says. But there is an important difference between Ian as in the movie and Ian as in the book, and that difference is Jeff Goldblum. I can't praise enough his performance here. Goldblum's Ian balances between a slightly naughty imp and last sane man, giving us a character of both charm and exasperated exhaustion, rather than the pedantic, self-satisfied know-it-all gasbag that we get in the book. Yeah, that remark's going to wind up in the comments too, isn't it? Ellie backs up Ian's overall view, though, that they already demonstrated a lack of appreciation of the dangers that they face just from the plants, never mind the animals. And Alan's saying it's just impossible to know what this could possibly lead to. The trifecta: it's irresponsible to try to control nature, your attempt to control nature isn't working, and you can't anticipate the problems that would come from trying to control nature. They all lead back to the main theme. With the arrival of Hammond's grandchildren, Lex and Tim, who essentially split the character of Tim from the novel between them, it's time to take the automated tour run by the park's administrator, Mr. Arnold, played by Samuel L. Jackson. While Jackson was hardly an unknown, he was prominent in several Spike Lee films and even led in a couple very minor films. But overall, for mainstream audiences, he was that guy, one of those notable character actors, and hence his relatively minor role here. This was a year before Pulp Fiction, though, would clearly establish him as a star. Speaking of stardom, the Dilophosaur is the first stop and is one of the memorable dinosaurs of the film. Because little was known about the dinosaur, it was a convenient choice for Crichton to fit his theme of unpredictability in this enterprise, that a dinosaur would be made that spits venom. Spielberg took it a step further with the quivering frills around its head and neck. What made it a good choice was the skull structure that suggested a weak construction and poor musculature for bite strength, so a fiction that it used poison to subdue its prey wasn't a bad idea, certainly. A lot more has been understood about it since that time. In fact, a scientific paper that came out just this month says it was not only much tougher and stronger than previous thought, but larger too, some 20 feet in length. And despite being from the early Jurassic period, already had some characteristics in common with birds. The Dilophosaur is a no-show, as is the Tyrannosaurus, despite attempts to lure it with a goat, prompting Alan to comment that a T-Rex wants to hunt, not be fed. This was a dubious assertion even for its time. Jack Horner, the advisor of this film series and the inspiration for the character of Alan Grant, had been spending time asserting that T-Rex not only didn't have an instinctual need to hunt, it didn't hunt at all. It was a scavenger. He admitted that sometimes he was just being a contrarian, but he asserted T-Rex spent a lot more time scavenging than hunting, and likely went for small prey, so a goat on a chain would be quite appealing to it. We know the scavenger theory is wrong, though. Undeniable proof of a T-Rex attack on a hadrosaur has cleared that up. But the point of the scene isn't to really establish anything about the T-Rex, but about the humans, to reinforce Dr. Grant as an expert for the later scene, and to back up his assessment, much like Matt Hooper in the examination scene from Jaws, to give him credibility for his knowledge, even if that knowledge in reality is suspect. His specific remark here contributes to the theme that efforts to control nature are doomed because they do not fully understand nature. Ian piggybacks onto this with his chaos theory, first in the memorable slam of Hammond for the lack of dinosaurs on his dinosaur tour, but also the way the T-Rex demonstrates the unpredictability that doesn't fit into the park's schedule. I've already discussed chaos theory and its application to the novel, so I won't repeat it here, but it's really unnecessary anyway, as Spielberg limits Ian's assertions being founded in chaos, giving far more of an approach that he is flabbergasted that he alone is seeing the obvious. Aside of his brief demonstration with the drops of water to just help people understand what he's even supposed to be an expert of, Ian says little about actual chaos theory throughout. But this is fine, because chaos theory, as previously discussed, is not actually the cause of the fall of Jurassic Park anyway. And since it's not the smoking gun, there's no need to overemphasize it. Well, Alan has had enough and hops out of the Land Rover to go look at a sick Triceratops, a change from the Stegosaurus of the novel, but understandable since the trike is arguably more visually interesting. It's sort of rhinoceros shape, but capped with its distinctive head style of ridges and horns, and its bird-like beak. Spielberg is notable for being a very visual director, as illustrated by the trike's introduction with the reveal from behind Tim's legs in the grass, almost like passing through a beaded curtain. Because the visual element is so important, I'm going to be talking a great deal about something that will seem a minor, irrelevant point, but I hope you'll see how it ties back into what helps make the visual aspect of Jurassic Park really work. First, let's talk about Jaws again. That film was shot in a 2.35:1 ratio. That is, the ratio of the length of the bottom to the height of the sides. Since these days virtually all TVs are 16:9, you see black bars on the top and bottom. But you barely see that in Jurassic Park, because it uses a 1.85:1 ratio. This choice was actually part of a trend for Spielberg. After Raiders of the Lost Ark, he began using 1.85 for all of his works, with a few exceptions. The Indiana Jones pictures, to maintain the same look, and the film Hook and Minority Report. It would not be until he made Munich in 2006 that he would then switch back to using 2.35 for the most part. Though to be technical, this was spherical rather than anamorphic, with again the exception of Indy 4 for consistency. Later on, he then used the so similar that some treated as being the same 2.39:1. Now, I realize that this probably all seems like irrelevant technical trivia, but it actually is quite important. See, Spielberg had originally switched to 1.85 for E.T. because it was a smaller and more personal film to him, and so needed the intimacy that would provide, unlike the wider screens, which provide room for horizontal movement. Basically, the reason I'm bringing all this up is because this is the filmmaker's canvas. It's like a painting, but with the addition of the dimension of time, so you have length and width and motion to determine what is the right size for your canvas. Take, for example, this scene in Jaws, which shows Chrissy in frame despite being thrashed about, and right up close. We're right in the middle of her attack. The width of the frame is what allows this. Now, in contrast, you can go back to the old days of 4:3, the Academy ratio as it's called, and technically it is 1.37:1. The film that is perhaps most famous for its work in the Academy ratio is Citizen Kane. Now note how, in order to keep the camera centered on Kane, yet still show us the approach of his underlings, that Orson Welles has them enter from the back and walk towards the camera, and then they leave the same way. So they don't suddenly appear and suddenly disappear. The hustle and bustle of the newsroom, yet without the clutter or distraction. Welles was not stymied by the lack of the horizontal that the Academy ratio provides. And then note how he makes use of the vertical space that it allows, the seated Kane and the standing men around him of different heights. Contrast this with Jaws, where everything was very much on the horizontal axis. So note how neither one is superior to the other. Two universally recognized masters of film making beautiful art with the canvas that they have. Like this absolutely gorgeous shot of Quint on the pulpit here. The use of 1.85 allows for a compromise between the vertical 1.37 of the Academy ratio and the horizontal 2.35, giving us plenty of horizontal space while still having the room to present tall objects or objects of differing heights. Even something as simple as this shot of Ian next to an enormous pile of feces shows how Spielberg keeps the pile as the dominant image, with Ian still close enough to provide scale for it, and to it in turn dwarf the human being with the enormity of this utterly mundane substance. If that's what Spielberg can do when literally filming a big pile of crap, how much more effective is it when we're seeing the giants of nature alongside ourselves? Ellie knows that this problem is pharmacological, and while all the pieces are there, such as the polished stones, to fit in with why the trike is sick, the film chooses to leave it as a mystery for those who didn't read the book, to instead focus on the twist into horror that is soon to come. The pending storm means cutting the tour short, with Ellie staying to address the sick animal with Dr. Harding, while the rest head back to the Land Rovers in order to return to the visitor center. This also means that Nedry has to rush his plans, shutting down the park so he can steal the embryos and make it through the park to the East Dock. Wayne Knight was cast this without even needing to audition. Spielberg saw him as the primary interrogator in the famous Sharon Stone scene in Basic Instinct, and stayed into the credits so that he could write his name down because he knew this guy was perfect for the role of Nedry, and it's easy to see why. While Knight is a highly skilled comedy actor, that scene is played completely straight, and he skillfully portrays the man being overwhelmed by her sensuality. And since it ties into what we're discussing with the film canvas, let me just say, that interrogation scene is another great example of using the 2.39 ratio. With its horizontal camera movements and the way Knight's face at one point comes towards the camera so that his moon-like face just becomes the world. If you ever wanted to have an excuse to watch the scene that shows Sharon Stone's naughty bits, I'm giving it to you. Watch it for the great use of the film as canvas. But yeah, that was a completely straight roll, and so as Nedry, Knight is able to bring both the sense of self-serving slime with his comedic methodology. Nedry dominates every scene that he is in. His babble about getting a soda to cover for his theft demonstrates his skillful delivery, and the fact that something as simple as his chiding of Dodgson has gone on to become a meme. Nedry's theft, alas, shuts down the tour and the fences, though a specific check reveals that the ones for the Velociraptors are indeed still on, still keeping the menace at bay for now. At this point, I should probably address the fact that the raptor is a case of us all being lied to. While working on the novel, Crichton read some dinosaur books, including ones by both Horner and Backer. Now, I have heard it said that it's supposed to be pronounced Bacher. I'm not sure about that, though it wouldn't surprise me if, well, I made the mistake of assuming that a child pronounced it correctly. But he also read another book called Predatory Dinosaurs of the World. The author, Gregory S. Paul, held the controversial opinion that the North American Deinonychus was just another species of Asian velociraptor. And so that's what the book said. Crichton found them to be a perfect addition as scary monsters, and spoke with Ostrom, the scientist who discovered Deinonychus. It was a very fruitful conversation, but at the end, Crichton confessed he was going to go with the name Velociraptors because it just sounded better. For a time then, when they were making the movie, the plan was to correct this. But in the end, yeah, Velociraptor really is just a better name. Even though it looks less and less correct the more we learn about it. Look at that. Velociraptor looks like someone asked Rob Liefeld to draw a duck. Neither species was really the right size either. Deinonychus is too small and Utahraptor is too big. In addition, neither Velociraptor nor Deinonychus was anywhere near as smart as the film or novel suggested. They were probably slightly smarter than the idiots around them is all. There is, however, one dinosaur that is believed had intelligence on the same level as chimpanzees, but before discussing that, we should probably get back to the poor people in the Land Rover. With the vehicle stranded due to lack of power, there's nothing to do but wait until the famous water cup revelation of the footsteps of the Tyrannosaurus Rex. It's a bit of a cheat. The sound and vibrations are not consistently used for the T-Rex's footfalls, to say the least. But it can be forgiven because it is such a damn effective way of conveying both the size of the creature and to ratchet up the tension. It's the equivalent of the dun 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 from Jaws, to let you know about the monster being nearby. Having established that Donald is completely out of his depth in nature, including cringing at the sound of the storm just minutes earlier, he abandons the kids to hide in the bathroom. Moments later, the T-Rex emerges from her pen, bigger than life. Note again how the use of 1.85 allows the animal to completely dominate the shot. We're just filling the screen here, with the Land Rovers providing scale for just how enormous it is. Take a look at a comparable scene from Jurassic World 2 Dinosaur Mansion. That film uses 2.39, and so consequently it has to pull the camera further back to allow for the dinosaur's height and the volcano, leaving this wasted space off to the sides. Now, Spielberg had actually tried to persuade the director to use 1.85, but he didn't force the issue. But it's the reason why it looks like this. Take a look, though, at how different this shot appears if we show it in 1.85. The actual film version of this might have been good if you wanted to focus on how small Chris Pratt is before nature, but the clear intent of the scene is the embodiment of nature being an enormous presence. Hence why I compare it to the Jurassic Park scene. The wider screen gives larger context, but unfortunately larger context diminishes the importance of the individual elements here. As the context gets bigger, the items within seem smaller. 2.39 is much more common these days because it makes your work seem more cinematic to be shot in that ultra-wide look. But really, it should be treated as a tool in your toolbox, and not every job calls for a hammer. That's why Spielberg, for instance, used 1.85 on the post, even though the majority of the films were going the other way now. You use what works. And a lot of time, that's 2.39. Even streaming works are getting into the act. So even though 1.85 was the more common format at this time, Spielberg's use of it here demonstrates that it's a deliberate decision. Because again, the film he'd done just before this one was Hook in 2.35. Sometimes the most common tool is the right tool, but the sign of a real craftsman is someone who picks the right tool because it's the right tool, and not the one who picks it presuming that it's the only tool. Unfortunately, the kids draw the T-Rex's attention, and it winds up attacking the vehicle. The scene is a tour de force in terror that words cannot do justice. But special attention has to be given to the special effects, the seamless integration between Stan Winston's animatronic and ILM's CGI. The promotional material for Superman 15 years earlier was, "You will believe a man can fly." That the film worked because it could make the fantastical look like reality. Jurassic Park could have just as easily said, "You will believe this is an actual dinosaur." The computer breakthrough that allowed them to leave stop motion behind and go fully digital may upset some for its ubiquity, but there is no denying the success in bringing an extinct animal back to life the only way we truly know we can, on film. While Jaws did show that even if your monster isn't terribly true to life, it can still be terrifying. By making this as real as it looks, the horror is ramped up that much further. The T-Rex has the power to absolutely destroy an SUV if it wants to. It happens right before our eyes. And then we see it roar in the storm in triumph. Oh, and as if this wasn't all scary enough, the dinosaur that's as smart as Velociraptor is depicted to be, you're looking at it. Current theory posits that the T-Rex has intelligence on the same level as a chimpanzee. So yeah, in addition to every other advantage it has, add the ability to problem solve. So I may be forced to take back what I said a little while ago. Given the way we see that chimps hunt, maybe T-Rex really does enjoy hunting after all.
You really want to make it look convincing, you have to animate every nuance, every breath, every muscle wobble, every swallow, every snort. Everything has to be thought of because it was very important that if we were going to have dinosaurs in this movie, they would have to look for me as real as though I were watching a National Geographic special on television about giraffe, rhinoceros, and elephant. You know, and if it didn't look as real as a camera can photograph an elephant today, only in our case it's a dinosaur, then I didn't want to do it.
In the effort to try to save the kids, Ian gets severely wounded and Donald gets killed. Martin Ferrero had apparently tried to convince Jeff Goldblum that Ian should die. That is what originally happened in the book, but neither Goldblum nor Spielberg were really persuaded. As the persons set up by their initial appearances being ill-suited to this situation, there were only two choices for them. Either a character journey, such as with Claire in Jurassic World, or dying. And since his character hadn't been given any character development, well, it was obvious it was going to be the latter. With the T-Rex distracted, Alan takes the opportunity to try to rescue the kids, leading to the scene of the T-Rex returning and the pair standing perfectly still. This was actually drawn from the book, which in turn was based on a theory at the time, but was rapidly revealed to be highly unlikely. In fact, Crichton himself pokes fun at it in the sequel novel when a character tries this, and Ian can only lament the guy who read the wrong research paper. And the only reason that it doesn't eat Alan and Lex is because it's already eaten. Instead, it pushes the truck around, which would make sense if it viewed the truck as another creature and was being territorial. It's not good eating, but she still won't stand for letting it stay here. This forces the two of them to retreat into the concrete moat inside of the paddock. To add insult to very literal injury, all this suffering and death was for nothing. Nedry is lost thanks to accidentally crashing into the sign pointing the way, and winds up crashing into the Dilophosaur paddock, where very soon he meets his untimely end, inside the Jeep. Note that everyone killed by a dinosaur tried to find shelter inside of a structure, thought the dinosaur was secured inside of a human construct, or else was immediately outside of a shelter. In other words, in the film, no one dies because they've been hunted down in the wild like you would expect. It is in proximity to human creations, where perceived human safety is, that people are dying. This makes clear to us that there is no safety here, not in an outbuilding, not in a vehicle, not even when it's surrounded by armed men in a cage. Human constructs cannot keep nature with all its teeth and claws out. Meanwhile, Grant has gotten Lex to safety and eventually recovers Tim from the damaged Land Rover, but they're long gone by the time Muldoon and Ellie arrive to rescue them. They are able to at least recover Ian, though, and despite an intense ordeal, they manage to escape the T-Rex. Note that during the pursuit, the T-Rex smashes the side of the Jeep with its head, suggesting that it is indeed perceiving the vehicles as another creature. After all, if the Jeep was a creature, it would have 4 jointed legs. A heavy impact from the side would throw off its center of mass and cause it to start tripping itself up, making it easy for the T-Rex to make the kill. Elsewhere, Grant has gotten the kids to the safety of a tree for the night, and after showing the brachiosaurs, to remind us that it isn't all just teeth and claws, Grant pulls out the raptor claw when it sticks him, and he throws it away, while huddling up with the 2 kids. A symbol of many possible things. That with the fact that dinosaurs walk the earth, he doesn't need to hold on to this remnant anymore. Or perhaps that claws lose their allure once you've been on the receiving end of them. But given the journey the character has been on, from a man who loathes children to the person that he is now, well, that was the thing he used to menace that stupid kid earlier. Throwing it away is discarding the part of himself that could ever be cruel to a child. Back at the visitor center, Ellie meets with Hammond as he's eating ice cream that was melting anyway, giving him an opportunity to wax on the reason for building this place, echoing the idea of Hammond as, in a way, Spielberg himself, a man who spent his life delighting people with illusion, wishing to finally offer them reality. Ellie has to spell out for him the film's theme, that believing you can control nature is the illusion. The same way the storm hit the island, no matter how much Hammond wanted it not to, the creatures he has created will not be contained. Unlike the novel, however, there is much less of a sign of this, since the park failed because of sabotage. But one could argue that the way the dinosaurs refused to comply with his wishes to be attractions is enough of a demonstration of his lack of control. Oh, and one last thing, the end of this scene. This is, after all, the last time that John Hammond has on camera to really just take a deep breath, to stop, to appreciate things. And at the end of it all, do we get a nice intimate shot of him? Are we up close and getting a sense of how it feels to be John Hammond in this moment? No. Remember how I said about how the larger the context, the smaller the elements feel within it? Well, Spielberg chooses to pull it way back, give it as much context as possible. Because after all, it's bigger than the man John Hammond. It's the dream of John Hammond, his park. So much effort, so much work, so much beating against nature to craft civilization on this island, to give something glorious to the world, and in the center of it all is the man himself, visionary, architect, craftsman, master. Yet outside these walls, nature reclaims its own with each fence toppled and each life taken. And all John Hammond can do is sit here like a modern-day Ozymandias, reciting the words that will be crafted upon his own forgotten monument, spared no expense. When we return to Alan and the kids after their close-up experience with the brachiosaur, Grant finds eggshells that confirm what Ian had said about life finding a way. As I got into with the chaos video, it's not chaos theory that led to the park's fall, but sabotage. Even Professor York, who actually named chaos theory, agrees with me on that. But elements of it did crop up, like here, the interaction of complex things, and DNA is pretty damn complex. Creating a hybrid can lead to unexpected results. But I suppose there is one way to say the fall of Jurassic Park, as it happened, could be attributed to chaos. Because what was Nedry's plan anyway? To rush off to the dock, hop on the boat, and leave with the JP Control Center bricked? They'd sue the pants off him. More likely, he was just delivering it and then returning and restoring everything to normal again, and brushing off any comments about extra security so they couldn't screw up what he'd already worked so hard to fix. The thing that forced him to alter his timetable, the thing that got him lost, the thing that led to him getting himself killed and unable to return to restore the park to full working order, the thing that caused those people to be broken down right outside of the T-Rex pen instead of being back in the visitor center where it was safe, was a storm that, for all we know, might have struck the island because in Peking a butterfly flapped its wings. Without Nedry to fix it, Hammond twists Mr. Arnold's arm into the dangerous option of shutting down and restarting the system to restore it to default mode. While he sees to the circuit breakers once that's taken care of, we cut away to Alan and the kids, who see the running Gallimimus. Now Alan calls out the bird-like change in their running path, although also notice the way they run towards the camera now, because they're no longer in profile, that their running makes them look a lot more like an ostrich, doesn't it? Many have already talked at length about the revolution in special effects that allowed for the realism we get. I won't duplicate their efforts much, but I will point out that this is likely because of Phil Tippett having a hand in this. When it was realized that what he was witnessing rendered his specialization obsolete, with the whole "I think I'm extinct" line that inspired the gag in the film, he instead took over the task in getting the dinosaurs to move correctly, given all that he knew about their movement. Also involved in all of this, by the way, was George Lucas himself. During post-production, Spielberg was also working on the film that would finally get him recognized by the Academy for his skill as a director, Schindler's List. But with those demands, Lucas took over some of the work here. With Mr. Arnold absent far too long, Ellie and Muldoon go to try to restore the system, when the revelation is made about the raptors. They've escaped with the power down. The next step. It's waiting, it's waiting, it's waiting, the film says. And now, it's coming, it's coming. This point is reinforced by Muldoon when he says that the hidden predators are already hunting them. So Ellie heads inside while he covers and eventually gets the power on, and it's here. As you likely know, the intention had been for Mr. Arnold to be shown getting killed by raptors, but thanks to another butterfly in Peking, a hurricane destroyed the set, so that part was left out. I haven't been able to find any storyboards, so I can't say for sure if Spielberg had intended something more grand in mind to finally reveal them after all of that build-up. While the jump scare is effective for the audience, much like the way the shark rising from the water unexpectedly in Jaws when it is first revealed, one can't help but wonder if the intention was to tease out the reveal before finally revealing them in all their glory. A foot with its sickle toe, a claw, and then the monsters appear. It's not that the reveal is disappointing. The monsters certainly live up to their build-up, but it's hard to imagine the Spielberg who reshot Ben Gardner's corpse to get the better shot wouldn't have liked to have the audience crawling up their seats as Samuel L. Jackson is stalked by nature's killing machines. Though it must be admitted, the hunter being outwitted by the raptor was a pretty powerful scene in its own right. Unaware of the drama, Tim is electrocuted but brought back with CPR and carried back to the visitor center, everybody blissfully unaware of the velociraptor threat. They learn the hard way. As the kids hide in the kitchen, the raptors hunt them. Spielberg originally wanted the raptor to flick its tongue out on the glass with its forked tongue like a snake, but was persuaded instead to fog the glass with its breath. Not only does it give an aggressive snort sound as it does so, but the fact it fogs the glass indicates that it's warm-blooded. And warm-blooded means supercharged. Now, like I said, the raptors don't actually appear until 15 minutes before the end credits begin. The reason that it seems like they're in the film longer, besides the way that Spielberg builds towards their arrival, is that once they are on the scene, they are relentless and unshakable. There's barely a moment to breathe once they appear, and when you do breathe, it's all too fleeting before it's time to hide and flee again. Even the restoration of the systems does little to slow down the raptor, only allows Hammond to call the helicopter for the evacuation. Hammond did actually have more to do. In the original scripted ending, the fleeing heroes eliminate one raptor, and Hammond then shoots the other. But with the success of the CGI dinosaur footage, Spielberg changed it so the T-Rex arrives instead. Now, reports are that Spielberg originally was very dissatisfied with the ending, so it's no surprise he would take the opportunity to change it if it presented itself. But let's not discount the bravery of this decision. This is the climax of the film, remember, and he was putting it in the hands of this brand new technology. There is even a small flaw. I have to really slow it down to show it to you, but for a moment, the velociraptor just disappears right in the middle of the T-Rex's jaws. See that? But still, the shot is so well done that even watching it at normal speed, knowing it's there, you still can't spot it. It's just that good. And not only does it make this more exciting, seeing two Cretaceous terrors facing off, but it also actually reinforces the theme more. The humans don't defeat nature, they survive it. The confrontation with the T-Rex and the raptors feels real because the CGI dinosaurs are interacting with the environment. Remember that Spielberg and ILM were both involved with Who Framed Roger Rabbit just a few years earlier, and so had learned many lessons on properly integrating animation with live action. It's just the animation was being done by a computer this time. It's enough to help sell the illusion that the dinosaurs are actually here, making that final scene of the T-Rex a glorious climax, a counterpoint to the watering hole scene. That was our first real view of dinosaurs, and it was all about awe, all about showing us this recreated nature as big and beautiful. And now the T-Rex shows us big and beautiful and oh so dangerous, oh so in need of being respected. The biggest strength of Jurassic Park is its dinosaurs. These creatures are phenomenal, and as people often note, still stand up even today. The weakness are the humans. The reason Ian Malcolm comes back for the sequel is that he's the breakout character of the film, and this is not due to the script. On paper, his character is no more nuanced than anyone else's. But Goldblum offers a masterclass demonstration in doing a lot with a little. It's amusing that a character who pounds the table going, "You want to sell it," so sells the character that he is playing. Wayne Knight overplays his character, but he's talented enough to make that work for him, and shows how out of his league he is in crashing into a dinosaur pen. But the rest, they occupy the character that they were given, but they weren't given very much. Now, don't misunderstand, this is a capable cast, and their characters are definitely likable people. But there is an overall lack of nuance with them, as if afraid that the people might overshadow the dinosaurs. Jurassic Park is a great film, an inspiring film, and a beautiful film. But there is a little room for improvement where the human element is concerned.